take place, which I think it remains the case that there have been no terror attacks, thank God, carried out on Polish soil, and long may it continue. But it is again a concrete I cited a couple of things there. It's another concrete metric indicating that things are well here. The perception in Poland and abroad is that Poland is safe, and that is borne out in reality. Whereas I think, even though compared to say the US, Ireland, the UK are still relatively safer, the experience people have is of sort of declining safety. And I think that's because it's something that we as humans are so very attuned to. Um, so what was I going to say? That is also a very significant metric in regard to this. Um, it's it really is fascinating when you consider that we can sort of consider where Poland came from. Like a lot of countries obviously began their rebuilding and their growth after World War II because they were in a position to do so, whereas Poland was stunted by the imposition of communism by the Soviet Union. So from 1945 up until what was the fall of communism in Poland? 1989, 1990, 1989, I think. Um, Poland's economy was massively stunted because it was very much what did they describe it as, like an extractivist economy or something like that, where the sort of elite uh, essentially plundered the country's resources for themselves, as is so common in communistic countries. Um, so when you consider that that's where the country came from, it's an absolutely astonishing success story. Um, I do think that one of the things that has lended it a lot of credit on the international stage, this is one thing that I wanted to discuss again before getting to my own experience of it, are the common sense nature of its politics and of its governance, because these are things that I think are sorely lacking indeed in Ireland and very much so in Europe. And in Gript, I'm obviously sort of attuned to these developments and often report on them, and they're received quite well by people who wish this were the case, whether it be in Ireland or elsewhere. Um, the Poland is a very contrary to media reports. It would be my perspective as someone coming from Ireland and looking in on the Polish situation that Poland has a very healthy democratic system, which is very much contrary to what you'll hear in the mainstream media, which always talks about the anti-democratic threat posed by the Polish right. Um, yeah, the anti-democratic threat posed by the Polish right and how they try to clamp down on this and that freedom. Despite the fact that, to be fair, liberals pointed out that when the Tusk government came in back in 2024, 2024, I think it was, um, they did many of the exact same things that the sort of right wing parties had done, but they were sort of praised for it by friends in Brussels, and indeed rewarded with the release of EU funds and things of that nature. So, all of that aside, I would say that Poland does have quite a healthy democracy in that there is genuine diversity of choice amongst the political candidates you can vote for in Poland. If you want genuine far right, that's available to vote for in Poland. If you want absolutely mad left wing politics, that's available to vote for. If you want fairly centrist, that's available to vote for too. I would describe Poland's, people on X will often describe Poland's current government as a leftist, but that's not particularly accurate. It's center liberal, and the president is a conservative nationalist. So it's a sort of straddling the middle there with very strong safeguards um, in place. And I think the fact that Poland's economic growth continues through all of this shows that it's sort of moving within a sort of common sense kind of on a general common sense kind of trajectory. But there are a lot of issues that are very divisive, I suppose, in Western Europe than Poland aren't quite so divisive. So the obvious one being immigration. Um, the government and politicians in general very much seem to listen to the public mood, which is something unfortunately I don't think in Ireland we can be. they really, the same message has to be shouted for years on end before there's even an inkling that it's been heard in Leinster House. Whereas over here, they're very kind of responsive to it. So in last year's presidential election, um, even the Liberal candidate, Rafał Trzaskowski, he had to very much play a sort of centrist at the least line on immigration, whereas the current president, the president who won, Karol Nawrocki, took a much tougher line on it, and he won indeed in part because of his line on immigration. Um, People will have seen the very dramatic scenes over at the eastern border with Belarus, where there has been, and I am of the opinion, people can abuse me in the chat if they like, or abuse me by my email, whatever they like. They think I'm just swallowing NATO propaganda. I do believe in the sort of hybrid warfare narrative over there, because I don't see how you easily explain the numbers of Middle Eastern men attempting to cross through Belarus's border, given the lack of obvious connections between Belarus and the Middle East, without them sort of being encouraged in that direction to try and cross over Poland's border and into the EU more generally. But Poland has done a fairly stalwart job of manning the border and keeping that the success of that effort limited. You do have obviously very left-wing groups in Poland that talk about, at the more extreme end, crimes against humanity and abuses of human rights and things like that at the border, but no one sort of takes that particularly seriously, because it's obviously a very tricky situation and it's being managed very well, to the extent that because of the situation on the eastern border, and indeed because of the situation with Ukraine, where Poland took an absolutely massive number of Ukrainian immigrants. Indeed, so did Ireland, but Ireland didn't apply for this exemption, as far as I understand it. Poland applied for an exemption from the sort of migrant relocation element of the European Migration Pact, the exact name of which escapes me at the moment, and managed to secure that exemption. So it is quite technical, but they do at least advocate for their own interests. The most recent example of this, again, I put up an article about it last week. And as ever, if you're interested in any of these topics and interested in seeing any of this in black and white, you can have a look on gript.ie, where a lot of what I'm talking about is available in article form. You had just in recent days the Polish president signing on a bill, which, it must be pointed out, was introduced by Donald Tusk's government, the sort of center liberal government, to curtail sort of special status, I suppose, for Ukrainian refugees, because while it doesn't, what people were getting confused about, it doesn't repeal temporary protection status for Ukrainians in Poland. Even still, Ukrainians had special status that allowed them to sort of circumvent paperwork that was required of other nationalities. That gave them access to sort of benefits, streamlined access to sort of housing aid and things like that, which was becoming increasingly unpopular, I should say, as the war in Ukraine dragged on in Poland. And whereas in another country, cough cough, Ireland, our own, that message wouldn't seep through, or would care more about our international obligations. That was very quickly picked up on in Polish political circles, and fairly swiftly acted upon by both sides of the politically uh, relevant, I suppose, spectrum. So I think a lot of those common sense measures are as water to a thirsting man for Western audiences, because obviously the sort of, particularly, I don't know. I know in Ireland we've a lot to put up with. I feel like the UK has it worse in terms of poor governance. I feel like I see about 200 million insane headlines out of the UK daily. And so I can only imagine how rival headlines, which are frequently sort of backed up by fact, related to Polish developments, are received there. Um, but that's all well and good, and it's on the theoretical level. Probably more interesting even to talk about sort of the experience of Poland. I mean, my experience of Poland very much corroborates a lot of the things I've been talking about here. Um, Whereas for people of my generation in Ireland, so I'm 29, turning 30 this year, the sort of how would I put it? The sort of oh, I see we just see a message just a moment ago, got kicked out from YouTube, but we should be reconnected to YouTube now, so hopefully that isn't an issue for people. Um yeah, whereas for my generation, I suppose the kind of, to put it this way, the middle class dream, the sort of the, you know, family, children, home kind of lifestyle seems increasingly impossible in a number of Western countries, or at least it's being pushed off to a sort of later in life, while people sort of try to financially establish themselves. It's still very much possible in Poland. It's not to say it's easy for people, but it is my experience, as I say, which is kind of what we're talking about here now at this stage, that it's more commonly done. I didn't actually look statistics up for this beforehand, which would have been interesting. But again, just in terms of my experience, I've encountered more young marriages over here. I've encountered more young homeowners than I have obviously in Ireland. Although on that front as well, the number of people in my own age bracket living at home with their parents is soaring in Poland. It's the highest that it has been in a long time. But I do think that's to be, as we're talking about, compared with Western European countries where the situation is, at least the Western countries that we're familiar with, like Ireland, Australia, where a lot of Irish young people emigrate to, it's much more manageable here. Um, in terms of safety, or the sense of safety, which is nearly as important, they may as well be different worlds. I think the best I can testify to that is that I really don't have any concern about, like, anywhere my wife might go by herself, go with our children. It's quite astonishing, and when visitors have come over to stay with us or come over to see us on holiday, they've commented on it as well. And there's so many aspects to this. Obviously, it's not just the fact that there aren't people on bloody scramblers flying around city centres in a completely lawless manner, as Dublin seems increasingly to fall to. Um, but it's like general cleanliness of areas. It's functioning infrastructure, like well-lit streets, all of these different things. It all adds up to a very pleasant experience. Um, Slight tangent, I would say it's notable from my Catholic perspective, which I'm not particularly shy about in any regard, that one of the most significant pieces of graffiti, I mentioned this on the podcast with Ben before, one of the most significant pieces of graffiti that I've seen in Poland has been pro-abortion graffiti. Um, you obviously do get graffiti of all kinds in lots of different places, but on sort of main thoroughfares in the major cities, and um, just generally in a lot of the sort of city centers, is really taken care of very well. Um, but the graffiti that very often breaks through there, and I assume this because these are the only people that are trying to graffiti in these places, are sort of like legalize abortion tags, abortion shouldn't be illegal tags, things of that nature. Oh no, I see comments from YouTube aren't coming in on our platform here, which means I'm probably missing a lot of comments from people. So my apologies if you're watching this and I'm not responding to your comments. We do have some slight technical difficulties this evening, but that's a shame, but not too much that can be done about that while we're live, I don't think. Can only extend my apologies. But and again, on on another slight tangent, yeah, I'm not ashamed in saying this at all, despite the fact that I know there's some diversity of opinion on this topic, even amongst Gript readership. I do consider that to be greatly in Poland's favor, that in the year 2026, it still has abortion so restricted. That is a great thing from my perspective. I know that'll drive some people absolutely insane, that a young man with a pathetic beard would dare offer his opinion on Poland's abortion regime or lack thereof. But I think it's great, and I mean, you know, more power to the Poles. I know there was even the last year, was it the year before? There was a very very slight attempt to liberalize, very slight, like nothing compared to what we have in Ireland or in other Western European countries. attempt to slightly liberalize the conditions around which abortion might be accessible. I can't remember the exact details, and they couldn't even find a majority for that in the current sort of, as I say, center liberal government. So Poland is, I think, by temperament, definitely remains a more conservative country, which is naturally, I think, is in its favor, and I'm sure many of you will agree. But back to the sort of point at hand about the points at hand about my experience of it. Yeah, extraordinarily safe country, extraordinarily clean country, and these are honestly, I really do recommend. And yeah, as I disclaimed at the beginning, I'm not being paid by the Polish Tourism Board. I just think it's a fascinating phenomenon. Poland is a fascinating phenomenon in the year 2026, when other countries seem to be experiencing the opposite trajectory. I would encourage travel to any of the major sort of population centers in Poland: Krakow, Warsaw, Gdansk, Wrocław. Any of those major cities, are indeed any sort of nature hotspot. Like Zakopane is very well known down in the mountains in the south. It's a very popular spot for skiing and for weddings, hiking in the summer. I do think that international travelers are generally blown away by the sort of handle police have on things. It's even basic things like sort of public drunkenness aren't, which is funny because much like Ireland, Poland obviously has a reputation for being a bit too fond of the, I suppose, vodka in their instance, as opposed to whiskey or stout in ours. Um, and that's really not visible in the slightest. You wouldn't know about it in these places. Again, it's I'm not being I don't and I'm going to get into some of the challenges Poland is facing now in a second. I'm not going to sugarcoat the fact that these things do exist in Poland. Obviously, I just think that they managed to maintain a remarkably functional country when that ability is diminishing elsewhere. In terms of those challenges, because see, we're already getting on, already 25 to 8. Um, from my perspective, and I think that serious economists or statisticians would probably agree, the most significant challenge, I was going to say unavoidable. I mean, technically it's not unavoidable, but increasingly difficult to avoid challenge that Poland is facing is its absolutely dire birth rate. Despite all of the things, and this is a puzzle. Well, it is and it isn't. Despite all of the things we've been talking about this evening, the sort of quality of life in Poland, the fact that people are coming back to Poland in their droves, Poles are coming back to Poland in their droves, tourists are so impressed by it. Poles, it's increasingly difficult to get them to have babies, to the point that, again, another article you can find on Gript.ie, a major hotel chain in Poland um, had the brainwave, and I mean, more power to them. They're trying something at least, which is more than can be said of a lot of other places. They started offering free baptism parties or other kinds of perks or incentives for guests who could sort of generally prove that the baby was conceived in one of their properties, in one of their, whether it be a rented apartment or one of their hotels or something like this. Which is very funny, but it is an example of how they're trying to take a whole of society approach to boosting the birth rate, and they're doing that with like extraordinarily generous child benefit. So even when you convert it to euros, the child benefit in Poland is more generous than it is in Ireland, which say is astonishing when the sort of relative costs of living are considered. Um, they keep raising that, which again Poland can only sustain for so long because the demographic projections are so poor. But it's a scheme called 800 Plus, where it's 800 zloty, the Polish currency, per month for every child. They do things like after 3 children, a family gets a big family card where they get discounts on doing a whole range of things, from public transport to access to different vicinities and all of these different things. So it's because they're doing all of this because the birth rate is so horrendous. And I foolishly didn't pull it up before this, but thankfully I'm sitting at my laptop. Um, yeah, oh my word, it's worse than I thought. It's something like 1.11 children per woman, which is far below the 2.1 replacement level required. It's below Ireland's. I think it's possibly one of the lowest in Europe based on that figure anyway, not far off the cutting edge, the world's cutting edge of this problem, South Korea. We spoke about this on a previous podcast before, the sort of demographic collapse and what an issue that is. And I still think no matter how much you talk about it, people don't understand how bad this is. The very basic issue is that for the societal model that we all enjoy, where we all pay into the pension pot and then we all get to retire and have our lovely retirements, you need a certain population structure to sustain that, where you have far more, younger working people to sustain a smaller number of retired or elderly people who obviously generally require more help from the healthcare system, who require more um, social help and social payout in terms of pensions and things like that. But what we have going on is people have less and less children. The shape of societies is changing to the nightmare scenario. It certainly will be in the future in some countries, South Korea, as I say, foremost among them, and Poland, not too far off, where you'll increasingly have something like an inverted pyramid, where you'll have fewer and fewer younger people and more older people. And it's simply not a sustainable um, situation or setup. It's society as we know it can't continue with that with that kind of arrangement. I keep pointing people back to Cormac Lucy's article on Gript.ie about the sort of Ireland's, I can't remember how he phrased it, Ireland's hidden debt crisis, which was essentially about how Ireland's debt problem is a lot worse when you factor in its pension liabilities. And I would really encourage people to read that to get a sense of the financial problem at play here. But Poland very bad on that front, and it's always astonishing to me, therefore, when we always talk about Poland's economic miracle without looking even, 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the line to this trend, when this trend is really biting and is really going to, of necessity, unless I suppose automation steps in and fills the gap, which I, perhaps skeptically don't see it doing, will um will really hamstring Poland's economic trajectory. A comment from Darren Kennedy here on Facebook. Because with fewer comments this evening because they're not coming through from at least one of the platforms, for what it's worth. So my apologies for people who commenting there. But Darren Kennedy on Facebook telling us, Polish are salt of the earth people, not a bad word about them. They came here, made their money, and no going home. All respect to them. I think it's probably a sentiment shared by a lot of people. Darren, certainly by myself. A lot of cultural compatibility between Ireland and Poland. Some differences. I think Poles are generally, we Irish are great for sort of, small talk and bantering and beating around the bush, where Poles are generally a lot more direct. And I think for some people that can be quite off-putting, certainly initially. But in terms of sort of cultural compatibility, in terms of faith, in terms of values, to use that nebulous word that's so popular at the EU level now, a lot of commonality there between the Irish and Poles, which is why I think integration for the longest time went so seamlessly between Ireland and its Polish community. I mentioned faith there. This is one that people feel free to disagree with me if you're on one of the few platforms that you're actually able to get a comment through to us this evening. This is one that I would say is a real indicator of, if I can say so, as an immigrant in Poland, Poland's potential folly, or the folly of the people, because I think this applies across the board, and so I'm not just singling Poland out, but that is the gradual decline in adherence to the Catholic faith and all of the sort of vital indicators that accompany that. So declines in vocations, declining mass attendance. But naturally, I'm a Catholic. I think those trends are linked to worse outcomes. I think that um, it doesn't paint a good picture. There's a whole load of ways you could approach this. I regret nearly bringing up such a big topic at the end of towards the end of the episode. But I think that generally speaking, obviously, just to put it in a very, very basic equation, although it's something I wish I could expand on more, a adherence to faith generally goes along with sort of good positions and sort of healthier outcomes for people, generally speaking. Um, Such that more traditional societies, I think, are probably better set to deal with reality and therefore benefit by it. And I think that that is, possibly one of the reasons why you're seeing a declining birth rate in Poland. No sort of religious impetus for it, because that is one of the few things that's coming out across the world, that religious people remain more likely to have children and to have more of them. Um, I think we'll also see a sort of movement away from things that are valuable for a nation, like patriotism, like a healthy love of country, to a kind of a sort of cynical self-interest, to a sort of even more relevantly, I suppose, can't leave that unmentioned, because I think the same thing happened in Ireland as happened across the Western world, sort of succumbing to what is in reality a kind of brainless consumerism, a kind of brainless materialism. There is a reason why the wealthier a country is, generally the less religious it becomes. I think those two things, generally, those trends seem to go together. Uh, and then ultimately it seems not to. Obviously, we're in the process of seeing it currently work out too well for the countries that takes place in, and the very same thing is happening in Poland. I've often said, based on my experience of Poland, that it is 20 to 30, it feels 20 to 30 years behind Ireland in terms of where it's at, societally speaking, in terms of its present cultural moment. You can obviously take from that what you will, but to me, it sort of speaks of a country without the sort of madness of the progressive flourishes of recent years in Ireland that so many of us were disappointed by. Um, so I would kind of sum it up, because this is very rapidly elapsed, which is amazing given that I'm essentially talking to myself here this evening. Or at least there are people watching, but I can't get comments from a lot of them. Um, that obviously absolutely love Ireland and things like that, and love Ireland. Think it is um, foremost among the countries of the world, but in terms of ability to live there and have a life, as you viewers know as well as I, and I'm sure in many cases better than I, it is increasingly difficult to have a life there. It can be done, obviously. I'm not completely blackpilling here. It's just I obviously have a Polish wife, and I'm very lucky to have a foot in the door of this country that's welcomed me so generously, which I also think is probably because I'm trying to integrate learning the language and hopefully being a productive uh, part of Poland's society in 2026. But it's a healthy, happy country to be raising two children in at present. And I would really, really encourage people, again, not a not a cent earned from the Polish Tourism Board here, to visit while it is, as I termed it in the title, Poland's golden age. I think you'd be quite shocked by the experience you'll have, because as I say, I don't understand why. I think it's just because we're still kind of we've got more westward attention. Maybe Poland is a little more eastward than we were traditionally comfortable with. But it remains one of Europe's hidden gems, even though obviously people like some of our commenters here this evening have only have good words to say about it and its people. So I would highly encourage people to get out and try it for themselves, because I really don't have many bad words to say about it, and I think it's got a lot going for it. But as I say, my apologies now, the comments weren't working on yeah, at least one of our major platforms this evening that we were coming to you by. I think we'll leave it there, because, as I say, I don't know for the life of me how I talked to myself. Talked to myself for 45 minutes essentially, but I did it, and I'm happy to have had so many of you along for this evening. So do tune in again next Wednesday. As ever, I'm happy to take pitches for topic ideas, as I did this week. This one, as I say, came in response to viewer request. So happy to hear your feedback, whether it be criticism or constructive, whatever it might be. Requests for further episodes in future, or whatever else you might look to send me at jason@gript.ie. Happy to see it. But we'll leave it there for this evening. Thank you all very much for joining me, and I hope to see you back here, same time, same place next Wednesday. God bless.